The stagecoach rattled to a halt outside the Hill City Depot on a blistering July afternoon in 1878, and Ophelia Owens stepped down with one gloved hand covering the left side of her face, her carpetbag clutched so tightly in the other that her knuckles had gone white beneath the dust-stained fabric of her traveling gloves. Fletcher Lawson had been waiting at the depot for 3 hours, hat pushed back on his head, boots planted firm in the South Dakota dirt that seemed determined to blow into every crevice of this rough-hewn town. He had memorized the tintype photograph she had sent 2 months prior, studied the delicate features and hopeful eyes until he could see her face in his dreams. When she descended from that coach, he knew her immediately despite the way she turned her head, despite the careful positioning of her hand. He moved toward her with long strides, his spurs chinking softly against the weathered planks of the depot platform. She heard him coming and turned, dropping her hand just enough that he could see it clearly in the harsh afternoon light. The bruise spread from her cheekbone to her eye socket, a violent palette of purple and blue that made something cold and deadly settle in Fletcher's chest. "Miss Owens." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Mr. Lawson." She tried to smile, but it faltered when the movement pulled at the swollen skin. "I apologize for my appearance. The journey was more difficult than I anticipated." Fletcher reached for her bag, but his eyes never left that bruise. His jaw clenched so hard he heard his teeth grind together. "Where is he?" Ophelia's green eyes widened, darting away from his face to study the dusty street beyond. "I do not know what you mean." "The man who put that mark on your face." Fletcher set her bag down with deliberate care, as though he needed to be gentle with something because his hands were itching to be anything but. "Where is he?" She had traveled 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to marry this stranger, and now she stood before him damaged and ashamed, certain he would put her right back on that stagecoach. "It does not matter. He is back in Philadelphia. I am here now, and that life is behind me. It matters to me." Fletcher reached up slowly, telegraphing his movement so she would not flinch, and tipped her chin gently with his calloused fingers to examine the bruise in the sunlight. The tenderness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the fury burning in his blue eyes. "Did your father do this?" Ophelia's breath caught. She had expected disgust, perhaps rejection, but not this protective rage that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a forge. "My stepfather. When he discovered I had arranged to come here, he was very displeased with my deception. He felt I was abandoning my family obligations." "Family obligations." Fletcher repeated the words like they tasted of poison. He picked up her bag again and offered her his arm. "Come on. Let's get you to Doc Harrison first, then we will talk about the rest." "There is no need for a doctor." "It looks worse than it feels." The lie came easily, practiced during the long journey west whenever concerned passengers had inquired. In truth, her head still pounded with every heartbeat, and the vision in her left eye remained slightly blurred. Fletcher guided her toward the main street regardless, his hand warm and steady where it rested over hers on his arm. "Humor me. I have been waiting 3 months to meet you proper, Miss Owens. I would like to make sure you are actually well before we continue with any plans." Hill City sprawled before them, a collection of wood frame buildings and false fronts that spoke of ambition tempered by the harsh realities of frontier life. The Black Hills rose in the near distance, pine-covered and mysterious, promising both fortune and danger in equal measure. Gold had brought men flooding into these hills just 2 years prior, and the town still carried that raw, unfinished quality of a place being built by people with more hope than sense. Doc Harrison's office sat above the general store, accessed by an external staircase that Ophelia climbed with Fletcher's steadying hand at her elbow. The doctor proved to be a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands that probed the bruise with professional efficiency. "No broken bones, thank the Lord," Doc Harrison pronounced after his examination. "But that was a hell of a blow, pardon my language, miss. You are going to hurt for another week at least, and the bruising will take time to fade." He fixed Fletcher with a meaningful look. "She needs rest, good food, and no excitement. You understand me, Fletcher?" "I understand perfectly." Fletcher handed over the coins for the examination without quibbling over the price. "Thank you, Doc." Back on the street, Ophelia finally asked the question that had been building since he first saw her. "You are not going to send me back, then?" Fletcher stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Right there in the middle of the dusty street with wagons rolling past and miners shouting crude remarks at each other outside the Lucky Dollar Saloon. "Miss Owens, I asked you to come here because I have a ranch that needs a woman's hand and a life that has felt half empty for longer than I care to admit. You agreed to come because you were looking for something better than what you had in Philadelphia. That bruise on your face does not change any of that. If anything, it makes me more certain that you made the right choice in coming west." Relief flooded through Ophelia so powerfully that her knees went weak. She had been carrying the fear of rejection for 6 days of travel, imagining this moment ending with her stranded in a strange town with no money and nowhere to go. "I will be a good wife to you, Mr. Lawson. I promise I will work hard and learn whatever I need to know about ranching. Let's start with you calling me Fletcher and me calling you Ophelia, if that suits you." He smiled for the first time, and the expression transformed his sun-weathered face into something warm and approachable. "We have got time to figure out the rest. I thought we might wait a few weeks before the wedding anyway. Give you a chance to settle in and make sure this is truly what you want. My ranch hand Tobias and his wife Maria live in the cabin near the main house. Maria has been looking forward to having another woman around. You can stay with them until we are properly married." The arrangement was both proper and thoughtful, more consideration than Ophelia had expected from a rough frontier rancher. "That is very kind of you. I confess I am relieved to hear it. The journey has left me quite exhausted." Fletcher's ranch sat 3 miles outside Hill City, nestled in a valley where a clear creek ran year-round and provided water for his cattle and horses. The house he had built with his own hands over the past 5 years, a solid structure of timber and stone with a wide porch that faced the evening sun. The cabin where Tobias and Maria lived was smaller but well-maintained, with flowers growing in boxes beneath the windows and chickens scratching in a neat coop beside the door. Maria proved to be a warm, round woman in her 30s who took one look at Ophelia's bruised face and immediately swept her inside with a stream of Spanish and English, mixed so thoroughly that Ophelia could only catch every third word. Within minutes, she found herself seated at the kitchen table with a cool cloth pressed to her face and a cup of strong coffee in her hands. "That Fletcher, he is a good man," Maria declared, settling her considerable bulk into the chair across from Ophelia. "Tobias and we have worked for him 4 years now. Never once has he raised his hand or his voice in anger. You will be safe here, little dove. This I promise you." Over the next few days, Ophelia began to understand the rhythm of ranch life. She woke before dawn to help Maria with breakfast, feeding the ranch hands who worked Fletcher's growing herd. She learned to gather eggs without getting pecked, to churn butter until her arms ached, to bake bread in the temperamental iron stove that required constant attention. Fletcher appeared for meals, always polite, always careful not to crowd her, but she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read. On the 4th evening, he asked if she would walk with him down to the creek. The sun sat low on the horizon, painting the black hills in shades of amber and rose, and the air had finally cooled from the day's scorching heat. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the water's edge, where Fletcher had placed a fallen log as a bench some time ago. "Your bruise is fading," he observed, settling beside her with his hat resting on his knee. "Doc Harrison said you were healing well when I spoke to him in town yesterday." Ophelia touched her cheek self-consciously. The swelling had gone down, though the discoloration remained. "I heal quickly, thank goodness. My stepfather was not usually so violent. I think my leaving truly enraged him because I had been useful in managing the household since my mother passed 2 years ago. Tell me about Philadelphia." Fletcher picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his weathered hands. "What made you answer my advertisement?" So Ophelia told him about the narrow house on Chestnut Street, about her stepfather's drinking that worsened after her mother's death, about her 3 younger stepbrothers who treated her like an unpaid servant. She told him about the newspaper advertisement she had found quite by accident, about Fletcher's honest letter describing his ranch and his hopes for the future. She told him about planning her escape in secret, saving money from the household accounts bit by bit, until she had enough for the train fare west. When he discovered I had purchased the ticket, he told me I was selfish and ungrateful, Ophelia finished quietly. He said no man would want a woman as plain and difficult as me, that I would come crawling back within a month. Then he struck me hard enough that I saw stars. I left the next morning before dawn while he was still sleeping off his whiskey. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, watching the creek water tumble over smooth rocks. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. "If he ever comes looking for you here, he will regret it. I want you to know that. You are under my protection now, and that means something in these parts. He will not come. He was happy to be rid of me, I think, once his anger cooled. He has already been courting a widow from our church who has money of her own." Ophelia drew in a deep breath of the clean mountain air. "I did not expect to feel so free here. Even with all the hard work, even with everything being strange and new, I wake up happy. Is that foolish? That is the smartest thing I have heard in a long while." Fletcher turned to look at her directly, and in the golden evening light his eyes were the color of summer sky. "I want you to be happy here, Ophelia. That matters more to me than you might think. I have been alone a long time, and I have had a lot of years to consider what I want in a marriage. I do not want a servant or someone who fears me. I want a partner, someone who will stand beside me and help build something worth having." The sincerity in his words made Ophelia's throat tight with emotion. "I want that too. I want to build a life that means something, with someone who values me. I think perhaps we might manage that together, if you are patient with my learning. I've got all the patience in the world for you." Fletcher stood and offered his hand to help her up. "Come on. Maria will have supper ready soon, and she gets fierce when people are late to her table." The weeks that followed established a pattern that Ophelia found herself cherishing. She worked alongside Maria during the days, learning the endless tasks required to keep a ranch running smoothly. She met the other ranch hands, grizzled men who treated her with rough courtesy, and seemed genuinely pleased that Fletcher had finally found himself a bride. She learned to ride the gentle mare Fletcher assigned to her, a patient creature named Daisy, who tolerated her clumsy horsemanship with remarkable grace. And she came to know Fletcher himself, slowly and carefully, through shared meals and evening walks and conversations that ranged from practical matters about the ranch to deeper discussions about hopes and fears and dreams for the future. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west after the war with nothing but his horse and his determination. He told her about building the ranch from bare ground, about the harsh winter that killed half his herd his second year, about the satisfaction of watching something grow from his own labor and planning. Ophelia discovered that, beneath his stern exterior, Fletcher possessed a dry humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. She discovered that he read books whenever he had spare time, an unusual habit for a rancher, and that he had strong opinions about everything from politics to poetry. She discovered that he was unfailingly kind to his animals and his employees, that he paid fair wages and expected fair work in return, and that the other ranchers in the valley respected him for his integrity as much as his success. 6 weeks after her arrival, Fletcher asked if she felt ready to set a wedding date. They were sitting on his porch after supper, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, and the question hung in the warm August air between them. Ophelia considered carefully before answering. "I feel ready if you do. I have come to care for you, Fletcher, more than I expected when I agreed to this arrangement. You have been nothing but patient and kind, and I think we could build a good life together. I care for you too." Fletcher reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "More than I thought possible in such a short time. You have brought something to this ranch that was missing before. Light, maybe. Hope. I wake up looking forward to the day now, knowing I will see you at breakfast. That is worth more than all the gold in these hills." They were married 3 days later in the small Church Hill city had built the previous year, with Maria and Tobias standing as witnesses, and half the town crowding into the pews to see Fletcher Lawson finally take a bride. Ophelia wore a simple dress of blue calico that Maria had helped her sew, and Fletcher wore his best suit with his hair combed back and his beard neatly trimmed. When Reverend Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her gently, carefully, as though she might break. The wedding celebration lasted well into the evening, with neighbors bringing food and musicians playing fiddles and guitars in the churchyard. Ophelia danced until her feet ached, passed from partner to partner as was the custom, but her eyes kept finding Fletcher across the crowd. Every time their gazes met, he smiled, and something warm and sure settled deeper in her chest. When they finally returned to the ranch house under a canopy of brilliant stars, Fletcher carried her over the threshold as tradition demanded. He set her down gently in the main room, where Maria had left lamps burning low and flowers from her garden arranged in mason jars. The house smelled of pine and leather, and the faint smoke from the fireplace sensed that Ophelia was already beginning to associate with home. "Are you nervous?" Fletcher asked softly, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. "A little," Ophelia admitted, "but not afraid. There is a difference." Fletcher crossed the room and took both her hands in his. "We will take this at whatever pace feels right to you. There is no rushing. We have got our whole lives ahead of us." The tenderness in his voice, in his touch, dissolved the last of Ophelia's nervousness. This man who had seen her bruised and damaged, and had chosen to care for her anyway, who had given her time and space and respect, when he could have simply claimed his rights as her husband. This man she could trust with all of herself. "I am your wife now," she said quietly, reaching up to touch his face. "And I want to be your wife in every way that matters." Fletcher's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet room. He cupped her face gently, mindful of where the fading bruise still marked her skin, and kissed her with a passion he had kept carefully restrained for weeks. Ophelia responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck as he lifted her and carried her to the bedroom he had prepared so carefully for this night. In the morning, Ophelia woke wrapped in Fletcher's arms, sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, and felt truly safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. Fletcher stirred beside her, his eyes opening slowly, and when he saw her watching him, his face creased into a smile of such pure contentment that it made her heart stutter. "Good morning, Mrs. Lawson," he murmured, pulling her closer. "Good morning, husband." Ophelia settled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "I could get very used to waking up like this." "That is excellent news, because I intend for us to wake up exactly like this for the next 50 years or so." Fletcher pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Though I suppose we should eventually get up and start the day. The cattle will not tend themselves, and Maria will come looking for us if we do not appear for breakfast." The first year of their marriage brought challenges that tested them both. A dry autumn meant water had to be carefully rationed, and they lost several head of cattle to illness despite Fletcher's best efforts. Winter came early and stayed late, with snows that drifted higher than the fence posts and temperatures that made every chore a trial of endurance. Ophelia learned to help with the animals when the work demanded all hands, standing in the freezing barn beside Fletcher to deliver a calf or tend a sick horse. But the challenges also brought them closer, forging their partnership in the fires of shared adversity. Ophelia discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. Fletcher discovered that his wife had a keen head for numbers and took over managing the ranch accounts, finding ways to stretch their resources further than he had managed alone. They worked together, planned together, and made decisions as true partners. In the spring, Ophelia confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She was carrying Fletcher's child. When she told him, sitting at their kitchen table over morning coffee, his face went through a journey of emotions so transparent that she could read each one clearly. Surprise, followed by joy so fierce it brought tears to his eyes, followed by immediate concern for her well-being. "Are you feeling well? Should you be sitting? Do you need anything? Should I fetch Doc Harrison?" The questions tumbled out in a rush so unlike his usual measured speech that Ophelia laughed despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "I am perfectly well, Fletcher. Women have babies all the time. Maria has already promised to help, and Doc Harrison says everything looks normal." She took his hand and pressed it against her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a child. We are going to be a family." Fletcher knelt beside her chair and pulled her into his arms, his face buried against her shoulder. She felt him shaking and realized he was crying, great silent sobs that spoke of emotions too powerful for words. She held him, running her fingers through his hair, and let him feel everything he needed to feel. "I am going to be someone's father," he finally managed, his voice rough. "I am going to have a family of my own. God, Ophelia, I never thought I would have this. I thought I would grow old alone on this ranch with nothing but cattle and horses for company." "You will never be alone again," Ophelia promised. "We are in this together, all of it, for the rest of our lives." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Ophelia's body changed, swelling with new life, and Fletcher treated her like she was made of spun glass. She had to threaten him with a wooden spoon before he stopped trying to prevent her from doing any work at all. They compromised, with her handling lighter tasks and accepting help with the heavier ones. In late September, as the aspen trees turned gold in the hills and the air carried the first bite of coming winter, Ophelia went into labor. Maria and Doc Harrison both attended, while Fletcher paced holes in the porch boards outside, occasionally coming to the door to ask if everything was all right, until Maria finally shooed him away entirely. After 12 hours of hard labor, Ophelia delivered a healthy baby boy with Fletcher's blue eyes and a surprisingly full head of dark hair. When Doc Harrison finally let Fletcher into the room, he approached the bed where Ophelia lay exhausted but glowing, their son cradled in her arms. "We have a son," she said softly, pulling back the blanket so Fletcher could see the tiny face properly. "I was thinking we might call him Thomas, after your father, if that suits you." Fletcher sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his eyes never leaving the baby's face. When he finally reached out to touch one impossibly small hand, the infant's fingers curled reflexively around his calloused thumb. The expression that crossed Fletcher's face in that moment was something Ophelia would treasure for the rest of her life, pure wonder mixed with fierce, protective love. "Thomas Lawson," Fletcher whispered. "Welcome to the world, son. You have got the best mother a boy could ask for, and I promise I will do everything in my power to be the father you deserve." Motherhood transformed Ophelia's days into a blur of feeding and changing and soothing, punctuated by moments of such overwhelming love that they left her breathless. Fletcher proved to be a devoted father, rising for nighttime feedings despite his early mornings, walking the floor with Thomas when the baby was fussy, sitting beside the cradle for hours just watching their son sleep. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. Fletcher expanded the herd and improved the breeding stock, while Ophelia established a thriving kitchen garden and began selling her butter and eggs in town for extra income. They hired another ranch hand, a young man named Samuel, who had come west seeking his fortune and was grateful for honest work. When Thomas was 6 months old, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. Ophelia's hands shook as she opened it, fearing news from her stepfather, but the cramped handwriting belonged to her youngest stepbrother, Daniel. He wrote to tell her that her stepfather had died of a heart attack 3 months prior, and that he hoped she was well and happy in her new life. The house had been sold to pay debts, and Daniel and his brothers were making their own ways in the world now. Ophelia read the letter twice, waiting to feel something beyond a distant sadness for the waste of a bitter man's life. She had feared her stepfather's potential pursuit for so long, carried that anxiety like a weight on her shoulders, and now he was simply gone. The relief she felt was tinged with guilt until Fletcher found her sitting at the kitchen table, the letter clutched in her hands. "He is dead," she told him quietly. "My stepfather. I know I should feel grief, or at least something more significant than relief, but I cannot seem to manage it." Fletcher pulled a chair close and sat facing her, taking her hands in his. "You feel what you feel, and that is honest. He was not kind to you, Ophelia. You do not owe him grief you do not genuinely feel. What matters is that you are safe now, truly safe, and we can build our future without that shadow hanging over us." The simple acceptance in his words freed something in Ophelia's chest. She had been so worried about being the right kind of person, feeling the right kind of emotions, living up to expectations that no longer applied. Fletcher loved her as she actually was, not as someone thought she should be. That gift was more precious than all the gold the Black Hills could yield. Years flowed past like water in the creek, marking themselves in growth and change. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy with his father's temperament and his mother's quick mind. He learned to ride before he could write his full name, trailing after Fletcher around the ranch with endless questions about cattle and horses and everything else under the sun. 2 years after Thomas's birth, Ophelia delivered twin girls who kept the household in cheerful chaos. Margaret and Rose had their mother's green eyes and their father's stubborn streak, a combination that tested everyone's patience and filled the house with laughter. Fletcher proved as devoted to his daughters as to his son, and Ophelia often found him having elaborate tea parties with the girls, his large frame folded into a child-sized chair with perfect seriousness. The ranch continued to expand and prosper. Fletcher's reputation for quality cattle spread throughout the territory, and buyers came from as far as Denver to purchase his stock. Ophelia's kitchen garden grew into a full vegetable operation, and she hired 2 women from town to help with the canning and preserving. The money went into a bank account in her own name, Fletcher's wedding gift to her, proof that she would never be financially dependent or trapped again. Hill City itself grew and civilized around them. The wild rush of the gold boom settled into more stable mining operations. A proper school opened, and Thomas started attending with 24 other children. The church got a new building with a bell tower. The muddy Main Street was graded and improved. Law and order, always somewhat tenuous on the frontier, solidified as the territory matured toward eventual statehood. Through it all, Fletcher and Ophelia's partnership deepened into something that went beyond love into the realm of true companionship. They could work side by side for hours with only occasional words needed, each anticipating the other's movements and needs. They could sit on their porch in the evening quiet, watching their children play in the yard, and feel perfectly content with the silence between them. They could face setbacks and celebrate triumphs with equal partnership, knowing they were stronger together than either could be alone. On their 10th anniversary, Fletcher took Ophelia back to Hill City for a rare overnight stay at the hotel, with Maria and Tobias watching the children. They had dinner at the restaurant that had opened the previous year, a luxury that still felt slightly extravagant despite their comfortable circumstances. Afterward, walking through the lamplit streets, Fletcher pulled her aside into the shadows between buildings. "I have been thinking about the day you arrived," he said quietly, his hands resting on her waist. "About seeing that bruise on your face and feeling like someone had punched me in the gut. I wanted to kill the man who hurt you. I think I could have done it without regret." "I know," Ophelia said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "I saw it in your eyes. It frightened me a little, but it also made me feel protected for the first time in my life. These 10 years with you have been the best of my life," Fletcher continued. "Every day I wake up grateful that you answered my advertisement, that you were brave enough to leave everything you knew and come west to a stranger. You took a tremendous risk, Ophelia. You could have ended up with someone who treated you poorly, who failed to appreciate what he had. But instead, I ended up with you," Ophelia interrupted gently. "With a man who saw me at my worst moment and chose kindness, who gave me time and respect when you could have demanded obedience, who became my partner instead of my master. I took a risk, yes, but it paid off beyond anything I imagined possible." Fletcher kissed her then, deep and thorough, right there on the street where anyone might see. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes glittered in the lamplight. "Let's go back to the hotel, Mrs. Lawson. I intend to spend the rest of this evening showing you exactly how much I love you." Ophelia laughed, feeling young and carefree despite the years and the children and the responsibilities waiting for them back at the ranch. "That sounds like an excellent plan, Mr. Lawson." The years continued their steady march. Thomas grew tall and serious, taking on more ranch responsibilities as he approached manhood. The twins grew from impish girls into capable young ladies who could rope a calf as easily as bake a pie. Fletcher's hair turned gray at the temples, and Ophelia found her own silver threads when she brushed her hair each morning. The ranch sprawled across 3 times its original acreage, employing 12 hands and producing some of the finest cattle in South Dakota. When Thomas turned 18, Fletcher sat him down for a serious conversation about his future. To no one's surprise, Thomas wanted to stay on the ranch, to eventually take over its operation when Fletcher was ready to step back. They drew up papers making Thomas a junior partner, giving him real stake in the operation's success. The twins had different dreams. Margaret wanted to become a teacher and traveled to the new normal school in Rapid City for training. Rose shocked everyone by announcing her intention to become a veterinarian, a nearly unheard of ambition for a woman. Fletcher and Ophelia supported both their daughters fully, proud of their independence and determination, even as they worried about the obstacles the girls would face. On a warm September evening in 1895, 17 years after Ophelia first stepped off that stagecoach with a black eye and a heart full of hope and fear, Fletcher found her sitting on their porch watching the sunset paint the Black Hills in shades of purple and gold. He settled into the chair beside her with a contented sigh, taking her hand in his as naturally as breathing. "You ever think about what your life might have been if you had stayed in Philadelphia?" he asked. Ophelia considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. I imagine I would have remained trapped in that house until my stepfather died or married that widow. Then, I suppose I might have found work as a governess or companion, growing old and bitter in someone else's home. It would have been a small life, a safe life perhaps, but empty of anything that mattered." "I think about it too," Fletcher admitted. "I think about the man I was before you came, all sharp edges and loneliness that I pretended did not bother me. I had convinced myself that a ranch and honest work were enough, that wanting more was weakness. Then you stepped off that stagecoach and everything changed." "We saved each other," Ophelia said simply. "You gave me safety and partnership and love. I gave you family and purpose beyond just survival. We built something together that neither of us could have built alone." Fletcher raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her weathered knuckles. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, and the first stars emerged in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear Thomas moving about, probably reviewing the ranch accounts as he did every evening. Margaret's latest letter sat on the side table, full of news about her students. Rose was in Cheyenne, studying with one of the few veterinarians willing to train a woman. The life they had built together sprawled around them, solid and real and more valuable than any gold the Black Hills had ever yielded. It had begun with an advertisement in a newspaper, a desperate woman's hope for something better, and a lonely man's dream of partnership. It had weathered violence and hardship, distance and doubt, growing stronger through each challenge faced together. "I love you," Ophelia said softly, the words as easy and natural as breathing after 17 years of practice. "I have loved you since you first asked where he was, since I saw that you cared about what happened to me even though I was a stranger. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Fletcher replied, his voice rough with emotion despite the years. "Every day, every moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Ophelia Lawson." They sat together as the stars multiplied overhead, two people who had found each other across impossible distance and built a life that honored them both. The ranch would continue, passing to their children and eventually their grandchildren, but the true legacy was this: that love could be found in unexpected places, that partnership could be forged between strangers, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was step off a stagecoach with a black eye and believe that something better waited on the other side of fear. Inside the house, the lamp Thomas was using flickered and steadied. In the bunkhouse, the ranch hands were settling in for the night, their voices carrying softly on the evening breeze. In the barn, the horses shifted in their stalls, content and well-fed. The creek continued its eternal song as it tumbled over smooth stones, providing water and life to everything around it. This was their kingdom, built with calloused hands and determined hearts, nurtured with love, and defended with fierce loyalty. This was what happened when two people chose each other, not just once in a moment of hope or desperation, but over and over again through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that made up a life. Fletcher and Ophelia sat together on their porch as they had 1,000 times before, and would 1,000 times again, watching the night deepen around them, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them together. That promise, made and kept through 17 years of marriage, was worth more than all the gold in the Black Hills, more than all the cattle on their ranch, more than anything the world could offer. They had found each other in the rough chaos of the frontier, two damaged souls seeking something better. They had built a partnership based on respect and kindness, grown love in the space between them, and created a family that would carry their legacy forward. It was more than either had dared to dream when this journey began, and it was only just beginning.